Hey guys, I wanted to do something really fun and I came across this really crazy looking animal called a Zebra Duiker, and I thought, how fun would that be to just do that? So the first thing that I do when I'm doing an animal is I look for a skeleton. And so I look up on Google, I get the skeleton images, I scale it to about as big as I want it to be in Photoshop. And then I decide what kind of wire. So it kind of depends what gauge wire I'm going to do by how big it is. This is the 22 gauge wire, and this is the 14 gauge wire, the aluminum wire. The 22 gauge florist wire is pretty good for any projects that are fairly small, not too big, maybe in the 6-inch, 7-inch range. Sometimes you lose a little bit on the legs, but if you double up, you can gain that back. So at first I decided what wire I was going to use, and this florist wire works perfectly for this size. And this size is a little bit, just a tad bit bigger than the spirit animals that I make. I have to keep them within around below 7 inches because there's a cute little box I like to put them in that's 6 by 6 by 6 that keeps me from just going crazy and going overboard. And so this is about that size, maybe just a tad bit bigger. And so what I do to start out is you bend it in the middle, and then you start twisting down. And I'm looking for the chest here, so I'm going from the nose, and this next part is going to be the chest. And having a printout is really invaluable. It really helps you kind of get the proportions, and of course you can make adjustments as you go, but this just really gives you the bones, so to speak, to build your creature on. One of the hardest things in felting, I think, is getting proportions correct. So having a template to go by, I think, saves a whole lot of time of having to rip apart and do different surgeries to your poor creatures to get them to look right. So there we go. We're putting the next part on. It's going to be the front legs, and then we bring it around to the back, and this is the chest cavity. So you don't want this to be too big. You don't want it to be too small either. You just kind of gently pull it around, and then you twist it, and this is going to be the spine. So I line that up, and I see from the shoulder and down the spine to this little hip bone. Just kind of calculate how that's going to come about. And don't worry if you get it a little bit too long or a little bit too short than normal. It usually comes out pretty good in the end as you felt it, but you want to try to get it as close as possible. Alright, so I've got that part done, and now I'm going to double up. This is going to make him even sturdier. And the back legs, especially with that last wire, didn't go all the way down, but this is going to fix that. You'll see in a moment. So just put that over the top. And we're going to twist these loosely. You don't want to twist it too tightly. And you just kind of pull down as you twist, and you want to twist them evenly. You don't want to twist one around the other one. And occasionally I accidentally do that, so I'll just back up and twist it correctly. And this little end piece, you don't have to keep going because we're not sure where our leg is going to be, so you can just stop down at the end somewhere. Doing the next leg. Just twisting. thought it would be really fun to do this little creature. I've done some deer and I've done horses and unicorns and all kinds of different little sheep. And this one is just interesting how it's got features of different animals. It's got the little hooves like the sheep and the reindeer, and it's got kind of a fat, squat little body. And I've never made one of these before, so this is going to be an interesting journey that we're going to take together here, but I thought it would be fun to just do this and film it and just see how it goes. So we're doing the back. See how we're just twisting evenly. See there, I accidentally twisted the one wire around the other, so I'll just back up and twist it evenly. I'm just learning to get the hang of the camera. When you look at the screen, it's opposite, so it's a little strange getting used to showing something to the camera. Okay, so on his head, it looked like his neck was too long, so I folded the end in, which was fine. You can do that if you end up having your neck a little long. But as I go along at the end, I'm going to change that to give him a little bit more. So you have the flexibility. Don't ever get yourself into a rut or anything where you feel like you can't change anything, because that's the beauty of needle felting. Here I'm showing the wire, 22 gauge, 18 inches long. It's just florist wire. I think I got a huge pack of them on Amazon for pretty cheap. And I use that wire for the majority of my sculptures. Some of the bigger ones I use the aluminum because this wire just isn't quite long enough, but it is definitely pretty strong, especially when you double it up. Okay, here I am putting on the tail. So I'm going to put on the little tailbone that sticks out and the tail. And this also just kind of reinforces the spine, gives it more sturdiness and stiffness. You want these to be gently posable. You're not going to be doing a lot of adjusting and moving around of the sculptures once they're done, so having it be stiff is good, so it holds the pose that you want it to be. Got his little tail. So I just pull that around and then you just wrap it back up the body. You could actually, when you get halfway up the body, you could clip it off if you want, but just using it to help with the stability. It's all going to be covered up with wool. Alright, so here we're fixing to do the bends and the legs. And I just use my paper as a template. Just line it up and make your bends. And I usually either clip a little bit long on the front, or if it's not too long, to begin with, I'll just leave the whole thing. That way, because sometimes as you're building it, you may need a little bit more or a little bit less. Once you get started, you can kind of tell. And for this animal in particular, I'm really going to have to look at a lot of reference pictures. And thank goodness for Google, they have quite a few even of this strange little guy. And so you want to look at different angles. You want to look at the front and the back and the side and the top, especially on ones with markings like the zebra stripes. Get as many reference pictures as you can, because especially with something that's so unusual, you want to be able to study from different angles how they are built. So I'm doing his knee, and this part of the knee, generally in most animals of this deer type, this is an antelope type animal, but of this variety, the top, well, I guess it would be knee, or the top bendy part, is usually up inside of the muscles and skin. But we're going to go ahead and bend that because we want to get a sense of proportion. Okay, when we get to the end here, one wrapped around shorter than the other. We ran out of room, but we have this other wire. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the little hoof. When we get to that part, we're going to do the other leg first. Okay. So I'm just mirroring. Just mirroring one to the other, get it lined up as best I can. When I get down to the end, we're going to make the little cloven hooves because they have teeny tiny. I mean, if you get a good look at these Duiker feet or hooves, they are teeny weeny little things. And they kind of looks like they're standing on their tippy toes. So I'm going to find about where the end of it is, and I'm going to fold it over, and then I'm going to make another one with the same wire. And that's totally cool. You can do it that way because this is all interior. None of this is going to be seen. Here, I think, yes, here I'm checking to make sure that it's standing about right. Making his little butt bone, his little tailbone, and then his little tail coming down so that I can kind of see when we get to felting where that tail actually begins. And so I'm untwisting down to where that bend is at the bottom, where we judged that the bottom of the foot was, and then I'm clipping it off because it would be a real pain to have to work around and fight with that much at the end. So it may be a little long, but we can always clip it again if need be. So if you're a little nervous, you want to leave yourself even more than that, it's perfectly fine. You can trim it more as you go. It's easier to leave a little longer and trim more than it is to have trimmed too far and then have to try to correct it. And so here I'm making the back feet. And there's two little hooves there. A split hoof, I guess you could say. That probably has a term. I should look that up and see. Cloven hooves, I think, is what they talk about on sheep. So I'm getting a small little tool because this wire is pretty sturdy, and the small bends you really need some more oomph. Get that nice and flat. So the tail, I'm just going to wrap it back up the leg. Most of the leg just has one wire, so there's plenty of room to be able to just pull it back up. And so this little bone that sticks out at the top, I have enough wire on this one. I can use the wire to my advantage here, so that's what I'm going to do. Usually we have to make a separate piece and attach for things like that. A separate piece we might make with a toothpick or with a piece of wire covered in wool. I'm just going to experiment and see how well it works to use the existing wire. Just checking my length before I pull it over and clamp it down. Yeah, looks pretty good. Now you'll see on the other one, it's not quite long enough to make that little piece, which is fine because this is an experiment anyway, and so when we get to that part, I may go back and use a small wire and just wrap around and make one. I may try the toothpick method. I'm not for sure. We'll see when we get to that part. Needle felting is a craft that's very forgiving, like I said before. It's a little bit different than, well, it's a lot different, I would say, than crochet or knit, where if you make a mistake, you have to pull it out and start over from where you made the mistake. With this, it's more like sculpting with a clay medium or something. You just fix it. So now I'm just making small little adjustments. And I'll refine that even more later as we begin putting wool on, but I just want to make sure everything is looking like the skeleton. And this is a crouching skeleton. It's hard to find good skeletons for this critter, but this is the best one that was pointing horizontal, that's more like straight on. Most of them were angled, but that's fine because when you get the bones, then you can move it and stretch it and do it how you, whatever position or pose you need it to be. Here I'm checking the front. I'm looking at these tiny little hooves and thinking I might need to shorten it a little bit, but as I'm looking at it, I see that the back legs might be a little longer as well, so I'm going to leave that for now. If I need to shorten it when we get to the next step, then I can always do that later. I'm never too quick to cut too early. And, you know, these are sculptures, they're not exact replicas, so if something is just a little bit longer, if the legs are just a little bit longer, that will just be accentuating, because these little guys have little long skinny legs for their little squat bodies, and so if the legs are a little bit longer, it just makes it more of an emphasis. So I'm not worried. I'm more worried if the legs were too short than too long on something like this. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this first in this series. Oh wait. Here is where I am fixing the head that I said earlier. So I folded it under thinking it was too long, but then as I looked at it, I see, oh, I can build up the back of the skull with the wire, which is really helpful. And see, now it is the right length. And then I notice that I have that I clipped off from the hooves to make his little horn. So let's go ahead and do that now. It's usually easier to get the horns underneath the wool than it is to try to put them in the middle of your felting. Sometimes that's necessary, but for this little sculpture, I think this would be better. And there we go. Thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed this first in the series, the armature. Stay tuned for the next when we start adding the wool. Until next time, thank you.